no points deduction, Kieran, but there is a literal and metaphorical fox in the hen house here because many people think there should have been a points deduction in the Championship this season. Kieran, I'll give you my layman's explanation of what I think happened, and then I'll give you my emotional response to it as a fan of one of the teams competing against Leicester City at the top of the Championship. So Leicester breached P&S rules in the Premier League. The breach was confirmed this season in March. Well, they were punished in March, but we think we knew about this a long, long time before in terms of the reporting. And Leicester were wriggling in between jurisdiction of the Premier League, who weren't allowed to punish them because the EFL, because they were in the EFL, and the EFL, who weren't allowed to punish them because the infraction took place in the Premier League. My emotional reaction is that is utterly, utterly ludicrous, ridiculous. How can you have a path between two leagues and an absence of jurisdiction? Do you agree with me? And how and when will this loophole be closed?
In terms of where we are with Leicester, this is one of the this is a phrase which is used by the Premier League on a regular basis as part of its opposition to the independent regulator. It's part of the unintended consequences of the Premier League being formed as a breakaway competition with its own constitution, with its own rule book to that of the EFL. Rules is rules. And if you don't draw up your rule book well enough, then there are opportunities for clubs to say, well, we're Leicester City. We didn't join the EFL until July 2023. Therefore, what happened in the 3 years previously when we were not part of the EFL does not come under the EFL's jurisdiction. And the Premier League at the same time saying, well, we cannot apply a points deduction made by the Premier League on the EFL because we've got an agreement that that's not the case. And I think that that's, to a certain extent, I think that is correct because in the Premier League, it's 38 games compared to 46 in the Championship. So an 8-point deduction in the Premier League is not the equivalent of an 8-point deduction in the Championship. Leicester employed the person who, in my opinion, is the best sports lawyer in the country to represent them, and that's what you do. And regardless of your views on the outcome, you always hope that whoever you're employing to represent you will do the best job possible, and they did. So what we have is a scenario that Leicester were relegated from the Premier League, and they lost a hell of a lot of money. They're the only club that I'm aware of has spent more money on wages than it generated in income in the history of the Premier League. The Premier League's got 30 seasons of, at some point, some fairly ludicrous behaviour, and therefore the club had suffered significant losses. Under normal circumstances, you would have expected some form of charge. Have they breached the rules? The simple answer is I don't know, because you can't say that with 100% certainty until you've been through the books with a fine-tooth comb. But what we will see happen is that Leicester City Football Club Limited currently owns one share in the English Football League Limited. And what it will do somewhere over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks is it will sell that share or effectively swap that share with Sheffield United or Luton or Burnley, and it will then become part of the Premier League. And the Premier League will say, oh, welcome back, Leicester. By the way, we need... You're part of the Premier League now, and from the 3 years to the 30th of June 2023, you were part of us, and therefore you were subject to rules. Come in, have a chat, whop. That's what we expect to be the case. Whether they're guilty or not, that's for the tribunal, if charges are made, to determine what could be the consequences. There has been talk of an up to 15 points deduction. Now, I think there's an element of scaremongering in that. what we are seeing, and you asked me earlier, you know, why my profile has expanded far more than I ever expected. It's because I go through the numbers and try to give people an explanation as to what they mean. And I also, in my view, I try to keep it on a straight and narrow, whereas there are other people effectively doing a similar role to me who like to shout 100 points, demotion to League Two, and I'm not really. Yeah, I'm a very boring teacher, and from my point of view, I try to sort of deal with things in moderation.
I've got a sort of double follow-up, Kieran, involving sympathy, essentially. Do you have sympathy for Leicester in respect to the fan that they lived everybody's dream, won the Premier League, have a decent-sized fan base, a nice stadium, good players, and you've just told me that they spend more money on wages than they made in income and got relegated with that squad. And the other side of sympathy, we've seen the likes of Birmingham and Reading essentially have a bit of sympathy from the EFL because they worked with them, they did the approved business plans and consented to all the embargoes and worked with them. Leicester have done the exact opposite, haven't they? They said, you can't tell us what to do. You can't tell us to sell Ndidi or Dewsbury Hall. You can't tell us we can't sign Harry Winks for 10 million, Connor Cody and Hermansen, the keeper, at the start of the season. I guess that's where your 15-point scaremongering number kind of originates from. Talk to me about those two sides.
Yeah, I do have sympathy for Leicester City Football Club because their wage bill was half the wage bill of Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United. So if they're only allowed to spend half of the money on wages as some of those other clubs, and we're talking 100, 150 million pounds, that puts them at a disadvantage. So they've got a disadvantage from a competitive balance point of view due to the nature of the rules. And then to say to them, oh, you've been relegated, so clearly the money you had been spending has not been spent particularly well. But yeah, that's football. To subsequently say that you're going to have an on-field punishment in the sense of a points deduction seems very unreasonable. And also, I was so proud of Leicester City in 2016 for winning the Premier League. Yeah, having seen it's not a cartel as such, but there is an awful lot of protectionism as far as the Premier League is concerned with regards to. It wasn't the issue of Leicester winning the Premier League. It was Leicester City taking one of the Champions League places, which are so lucrative. Winning the Champions League next season could be worth 200 million quid to a club. If you think that the average revenue of a non-parachute club in the Championship is 20, 25 million, you're making 10 times as much from a midweek afterthought competition. So it's a very strange environment in which we live in. So I do have sympathy for Leicester. At the same time, they were aware of what they were doing when they were signing players to long-term contracts. There are stories around that there were relatively few relegation clauses in contracts. So seeing Leicester's accounts for the year, which was just the season has just finished, I think will be fascinating because presumably there'll be some significant promotion bonuses to take into consideration there.
Kieran, can I just ask really quickly? I saw reported, maybe incorrectly, I thought promotion bonuses didn't count towards P&S. Has that changed?
I thought the same. I mean, I don't know. I remember listening to somebody say this, but if you take a look at a detailed breakdown of the Nottingham Forest charges, and remember Nottingham Forest is a points deduction, that promotion bonuses, you don't get an exemption for those.
Wow.
Which intuitively seems very harsh, because those promotion bonuses are somewhere normally in the region of 10 to 15 million pounds. And then you see by how much Forest were over the Premier League PSR limit, it seems a very harsh thing to do. So yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess of the making of the people who designed the rules. I don't think that they were stress tested enough for the potential consequences, and we're now living through that mess. And clubs are getting increasingly grumpy, or rather, club owners. Yeah, the Premier League, it has spent £30 million this season on legal bills. That's more than Bristol City will have earned from running the football club for a year or something like that. So the balance is just not quite right.
So just round this out on Leicester quickly, and we can move on. Potential double breach and not cooperating last year. Have you got an estimation for a minus number? And particularly, you're speaking to Ipswich and Southampton fans here, and maybe Everton fans.
I think in terms, well, I mean, Everton have got issues which also might come to light, which is a separate issue. I can understand the frustration of those the fans of Southampton, Leeds, and so on, as a result of Leicester, in the eyes of fans, being seen to get away with it. And they sold James Mattheson, they sold Harvey Barnes, Tielemans left. So it wasn't a case of they kept on hold of everybody. From the perspective of those rival fans, I guess they all will be saying, well, you deserved it. I'm slightly more sympathetic towards the club. It budgeted to finish 8th, 9th, 10th in the Premier League, and it screwed up. We've all made bad decisions when recruiting, as otherwise there'd be no divorce.